Modern games keep getting bigger and more impressive, but sometimes nothing beats the classics. Every now and then, we all go back to relive a little nostalgia, only to realize that many older games are still more fun than a lot of today's releases. Some of these games changed gaming forever, others simply never stopped being fun. So today, we're counting down 20 classic games that have truly stood the test of time and are still more enjoyable than many modern titles. Let's get started. Half-Life 2. The loading screen never came. You just arrived. Half-Life 2 opens without a cutscene, without a tutorial, without anyone breaking the fourth wall to explain what's happening. You step off a train in City 17 and the world is already in motion around you. Soldiers patrolling, citizens shuffling past with their heads down, a propaganda broadcast echoing off crumbling buildings. You are Gordon Freeman, a man who apparently saved the world once, and the world he returns to is worse for it. What Valve understood in 2004 that many studios still struggle with is that immersion isn't built through spectacle, it's built through consistency. Every NPC reacts to you. Every environment has a history you can read without a single line of exposition. The gravity gun alone, a tool that lets you interact with nearly any physics object, made every room a puzzle and every combat encounter a conversation with the environment. Around 12-15 hours, every hour earned. Nobody knew a game could be this big, not just in map size, in ambition. San Andreas dropped players into a fictionalized version of early 1990s California, Nevada, and Nevada's surrounding decay, and then handed them a world that breathed. Carl Johnson comes home for his mother's funeral and gets pulled back into everything he tried to leave behind. The story is genuinely good, better than it had any right to be for a game also containing jetpacks, casino heists, and a mission where you learn to fly a plane at 3 a.m. because the game demands it. What made San Andreas impossible to put down wasn't the mission structure, it was the feeling that the world had things in it you hadn't found yet. A radio station you hadn't heard, a neighborhood you hadn't explored, a ramp you hadn't jumped. The game ran around 30 to 40 hours for the story and indefinitely for everything else. 2 decades later, modders are still adding to it. That's not a game that aged, that's a game that became permanent. Call of Duty 4: Modern Warfare. Before every military shooter borrowed its ideas, there was one that invented them. Call of Duty 4 arrived in 2007 and did 2 things simultaneously. It told a campaign story so confident and so well-paced that people still hold it up as a benchmark, and it launched a multiplayer progression system that rewired how the entire industry thought about player retention. The campaign alone, 5 to 6 hours, contains more memorable set pieces per hour than most games manage in 20. A mission played entirely as a dying soldier, a nuclear blast seen from the air, a ghillie suit crawl through a field that taught players what tension actually felt like in a first-person game. What made it work wasn't production budget, it was restraint. Every scene knew exactly what it needed to do, and did only that. The multiplayer is still alive today, the campaign holds up completely. Some games set trends, Modern Warfare set a decade. Ratchet and Clank: Up Your Arsenal. At some point in Up Your Arsenal, you will fire a weapon that turns enemies into penguins, and it will be completely consistent with the tone of everything around it. Insomniac's third entry in the Ratchet and Clank series is the one that locked in everything the franchise was capable of. The weapon variety isn't just mechanical, it's comedic, absurdist, and deeply satisfying in a way that few shooters manage regardless of budget. Each gun levels up with use, grows more powerful, and eventually becomes something ridiculous. The platforming is tight. The writing is genuinely funny without winking at the camera, and the multiplayer for a game this focused on its single player was surprisingly robust. Up Your Arsenal runs around 10-12 hours and doesn't waste a moment. It understood that games don't have to choose between being clever and being fun. It was both, effortlessly at the same time. A lot of games are still trying to figure out that trick. Battlefield 2. 200 players never met in person, they still talk about the same round. Battlefield 2 arrived in 2005 and created something that most multiplayer games since have chased unsuccessfully: genuine emergent warfare. Not scripted chaos, not curated content drops, actual spontaneous events that happen because the systems were deep enough to generate them. A squad calling in air support at the right moment, a sniper holding a bridge single-handedly for 12 minutes, a commander whose satellite imagery actually changed how the ground team moved. The communication system, squads, commanders, radio chatter, was designed to make coordination feel natural rather than mandatory. When it clicked, a round of Battlefield 2 felt like something that would never happen exactly that way again, because it wouldn't. Every match was its own story. The game is old enough now that official servers are long gone, but communities keep it alive because nothing has fully replaced what it built. Assassin's Creed Unity. Paris in 1789 has never been recreated this completely in a game, before or since. Unity launched in a state that was genuinely unacceptable, broken, unstable, and transparently unfinished. But here's what happened in the years after. Ubisoft patched it, players returned, and what they found once the technical disaster had been addressed was one of the most fully realized historical open worlds the series had produced. The Notre Dame Cathedral alone, explorable inside and out, every architectural detail intact, became one of gaming's most haunting artifacts after the real building's 2019 fire. Arno's Paris is dense in a way that Assassin's Creed rarely is. Every arrondissement has its own character. The crowd systems make the streets feel genuinely populated. The parkour, when it works, is still the most fluid the series ever achieved. Unity deserved better than its launch. The version that exists today, patched, free to play for a time, freely available, is worth the time. No game before or after Psychonauts has used mental illness as a level design philosophy quite this way, and meant it with complete sincerity. Double Fine's 2005 cult classic sends Raz, a psychic child who ran away from the circus, to attend a summer camp for psychic children, deep into the minds of the people around him. Every mind is its own world. A paranoid milkman suburb where the roads loop back on themselves. A watercolor painting of a poet's grief. A game show running inside a censored bureaucrat's head, where all the contestants have the same face. Each level is a self-contained statement about the person it belongs to, and the game earns every emotional beat it reaches for. Psychonauts was commercially overlooked when it launched, discovered slowly by the people who championed it, and eventually recognized as one of the most original platformers ever made. It runs around 12-15 hours. The sequel is excellent too, but start here with the one that almost didn't make it. Star Wars Battlefront. There was a summer when this game was all anyone played. You know which summer. Pandemic Studios' 2004 Battlefront put players inside the Star Wars battles they'd watched on screen for their entire lives and gave them complete freedom to participate. Not as a hero, as a soldier. A clone trooper on Hoth, a rebel holding a corridor on the Death Star, a droid advancing across Geonosis. The scale felt right. The chaos felt right. The sound of blasters and explosions and ship engines layered together felt exactly the way it was supposed to. What made it work was the commitment to the fantasy over competitive balance. This wasn't a precision shooter trying to be fair. It was a Star Wars battle trying to be cinematic, and it succeeded. The single-player Galactic Conquest mode, where you manage territory across the galaxy between battles, gave it a campaign shape that kept pulling you back in. Around 20 to 30 hours to really dig into. Still one of the finest licensed games ever made. Somewhere on that island, you stopped being the person you were when you arrived. Far Cry 3 understood something that most open-world games don't bother with. The environment can be a character. Rook Island isn't just a map. It's a place with a personality, lush and beautiful on the surface, violent and indifferent underneath. Jason Brody arrives as someone completely out of his depth and leaves as something else entirely. The game is quietly disturbed by its own protagonist, and that tension between the fun of being powerful and the cost of becoming that way gives Far Cry 3 an edge that most sandbox games sand down. And then there's Vobs. Michael Mando's performance, unpredictable, quotable, genuinely unnerving, set the bar for open-world antagonists that games are still reaching for. The definition of insanity speech isn't iconic because it was written well. It's iconic because Mando made it feel like a warning. Around 15-20 hours, still one of the best arguments for single-player open worlds. Dragon Age Inquisition. The War Table. The War Table is where Inquisition hooks you and doesn't let go. Dragon Age Inquisition gives you a fortress, a council of advisors, an organization with military and political reach, and a world in crisis. You don't just play a hero, you manage an institution. The War Table, where you assign agents to missions that resolve in real time, made the Inquisition feel like a real thing you'd built, rather than a story you'd been handed. Every decision rippled outward in ways that took hours to surface. The companions are the real achievement. Vivian's cold political calculations, Dorian's arc, handled with more sincerity than most games attempt. Blackwall's secret, which recontextualizes everything about him at a moment you don't see coming. The main story runs 40-50 hours, and the completionist path goes well beyond 100. Inquisition is patient in the way that the best long-form stories are patient. It trusts you to care, and earns it. BioShock. The lighthouse, the plane crash, the descent into water, and then Rapture. The BioShock's opening sequence is one of gaming's great entrances, not because of spectacle, but because of what it implies. An Art Deco city under the ocean, built on the philosophy that mankind could achieve anything without God or government. And then you see what happens when that philosophy runs to its logical conclusion. The city is ruined, its residents have become monsters, and the dream has curdled into something grotesque. Kun Levine's game is a first-person shooter that uses its combat as punctuation for ideas rather than the other way around. The plasmids, genetic modifications that grant powers aren't just mechanics. They're the game's argument about what Rapture promised its citizens. Would you kindly? 3 words that redefine everything you experienced before them. BioShock runs around 12 to 15 hours, earns its ending, and leaves you thinking about it long after. Some games want to entertain you. This one wanted to say something. Arkham Island is not a large space. Rocksteady made it feel enormous. What the Arkham Island team understood is that scale in games is not about square miles, it's about density. Every section of the Asylum has history, has detail, has something to find if you look. The Riddler's trophies and riddles scattered across the island weren't padding. They were an invitation to pay attention to the space in a way that games rarely ask players to do. And the space rewarded it. The combat system, that free-flow rhythm of strikes and counters that became a template for years of games afterward, felt like thinking rather than reflex. You're not mashing buttons. You're reading a room and deciding how it ends. The story escalates with the confidence of a writer who knows exactly where they're going. Around 12 hours for the story, longer for completion. Arkham Asylum proved that licensed games didn't have to apologize for existing. They could set the standard. Mass Effect 2 spent its entire runtime building toward its ending, and it trusted players to understand that every choice they made along the way was preparation. Every loyalty mission completed, every conversation deepened, every upgrade purchased. All of it fed into a final sequence that could go perfectly or catastrophically, depending on how you'd played. Not through a difficulty slider, through attention. The companion roster remains one of the finest ever assembled. Morden's clinical compassion, Thane's quiet dignity, Legion's patient curiosity about humanity. The game understood that the best way to make the stakes feel real was to make you care about the people at risk before the risk arrived. Around 25-30 hours. The decisions carry forward across the trilogy. Mass Effect 2 is what happens when a game trusts its players completely. Divinity, Original Sin. The game gave 2 players a murder mystery to solve and let them argue about the solution in real time. That was always going to work. Divinity Original Sin arrived in 2014 as a reminder that the classic CRPG format, isometric, turn-based, deeply systemic, hadn't been replaced. It had just been waiting for someone to do it properly again. The combat system, built around elemental interactions, rewards creativity over memorization. Set oil on fire, turn rain into a conductor for electricity, freeze water to create ice, your enemies slip on. Every environment is a physics puzzle, as much as a tactical arena. The co-op is where it becomes something truly special. 2 players controlling separate protagonists who can genuinely disagree with each other through a dialogue system that forces debate and compromise. Around 60 to 100 hours depending on how thoroughly you explore. Divinity Original Sin proved that depth and accessibility weren't opposites. They just needed the right game to prove it. Need for Speed, Most Wanted. Rockport's police radio crackled, headlights appeared in your mirror, and your palms went wet on the controller. Most Wanted understood the specific pleasure of the chase, not just being fast but being hunted. The pursuit system escalated with logic. More damage, higher heat level, more aggressive tactics. At Heat 5, the police were deploying helicopters, spike strips, and roadblocks that forced you to plan routes rather than just accelerate. And when you lost them, when you finally shook the last cruiser by ducking into a parking garage or disappearing into a tunnel, the silence that followed felt earned. The Blacklist system gave the game a campaign shape that kept the racing meaningful. Each rival had a car worth taking, a personality worth despising, and a moment of defeat worth savoring. The soundtrack, remembered by everyone who played it, matched the aggression of every chase. Around 20 to 25 hours, nothing before or after has made getting chased feel quite this alive. The Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth 2. Somewhere in 2006, a 12-year-old figured out how to wall off Helm's Deep with elven archers. They haven't forgotten. Battle for Middle-earth 2 took the real-time strategy formula, base building, resource management, unit production, and filled it with the scale and drama of Tolkien's world. Building a fortress of dwarven halls, sending Ents to pull down enemy siege towers, watching the eagles arrive at exactly the right moment. The game made you feel like you were orchestrating the battles rather than simply watching them. The hero units, Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, could turn a fight on their own, but required protection to do so. That tension between using your most powerful assets aggressively and keeping them alive created a strategic pressure that elevated every engagement. The good and evil campaigns offered genuinely different experiences of the same war. Around 20-25 hours for both campaigns, more for skirmish and multiplayer. An RTS that understood exactly who it was for. This one is different from everything else on this list. And that's exactly why it belongs. The Polar Express video game was not a great game by any objective measure. It received mixed to negative reviews. Critics pointed to repetitive minigames, basic level design, and a short runtime. None of that is wrong. But something happened with this game that critical assessments can't fully account for. A generation of children played it at Christmas, in warm houses, with the film's score playing over levels set on a moving train in the snow, and the experience of it became inseparable from the season itself. The game runs maybe 3 to 4 hours. It doesn't outstay its welcome. For children in 2004, it was a portal, not into the world of gaming, into a feeling, the belief that something magical was actually happening, that you were really on that train. That's not a small thing. Nostalgia is not dishonesty. Sometimes a game's legacy is not what it achieved technically, it's what it meant to the person who played it. Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 arrived at a strange in the series and asked a question that still starts arguments. What happens when you give Resident Evil a co-op partner? The answer, it turned out, was that the horror became something different, not scarier, more tense. You're managing 2 survivors instead of 1, sharing resources, watching each other's backs, making decisions under pressure that now have consequences for someone else. Chris and Sheva's partnership, whether played with an AI companion or a real person, created a specific kind of stress that survival horror rarely generates, the anxiety of being responsible for someone. The game is more action-oriented than its predecessor, and whether that trade-off works is genuinely a matter of taste. But its African setting, Kijuju's markets, the marshlands, the Majini villages, created an atmosphere distinct from every other entry. Around 10-12 hours solo, faster co-op. The final stretch is pure spectacle. Ratchet 5 is not the game purists wanted, but it is a game that found its own thing, and committed to it completely. Fallout 3, you were born in that vault, and the moment those doors opened and the light hit you, something changed. Fallout 3 moved the series into 3 dimensions and set it in the ruins of Washington, D.C., and the choice of setting was inspired. These weren't anonymous ruins, they were the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, the remains of a world that players had seen in history books, now collapsed under 200 years of radiation and desperation. Every landmark told a story about what the old world valued and what it cost. The VATS system, pause, target specific limbs, watch the results, made combat theatrical as much as tactical. Each abandoned building, each radio signal followed into the wilderness, revealed something about how this world ended and who survived it. Around 20 to 25 hours for the main story, but the wasteland punishes you for hurrying. Some of the finest moments in Fallout 3 are the ones nobody sent you to find. Around 40 to 50 hours if you let it breathe. It deserves the time. The last entry on this list is not the oldest, but it may be the one that future lists of this kind will use as a reference point for everything that came after it. The Witcher 3 is still the answer when people ask what a great open-world RPG looks like, not because it was technically unprecedented, but because every element of it served the same goal. The writing, the world design, the quests, the characters, the combat, the music, all of it aimed at making Geralt's world feel like a place with a history that existed before you arrived and would continue after you left. Side quests that in any other game would be fetch tasks are here entire short stories with moral weight and unexpected endings. The Bloody Baron questline, Dijkstra's negotiation, the final act of Hearts of Stone. These are not gaming memories. They're the kind of memories that belong to any medium doing its best work. Around 50 hours for the main story. 2 DLCs, each the size of a complete game. The Witcher 3 isn't on this list as a reminder of what old games were. It's here as proof of what games can be, when everyone involved refuses to settle. Which games would you add to this list? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.